Once a woman marries, she's no longer part of the family. Family celebrations are only for family, so leave already. My sister Amy said this to me with a sneer, her voice sharp and unyielding. My mother stood nearby, silently nodding, urging me to hurry up and go. I had returned home to celebrate Amy's coming-of-age ceremony, yearning for some warmth, a small sense of belonging. Instead, I was met with their cold rejection, as though I were a stranger trespassing on sacred ground. It was at that moment the truth hit me. I no longer belonged. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to remain composed. If this is how they feel, there's only one thing I can do: make them regret their words. My name is Sherry, and I'm 22 years old. I've grown used to living on my own these past 4 years. Ever since I left home after graduating from vocational high school, life hasn't been easy, but it's mine. I've worked tirelessly to make ends meet. There's no luxury, no safety net, but there's pride in supporting myself. Still, the shadows of my past follow me, lingering like a weight I can't shake. The day before my first birthday, my father left us for another woman. My mother never forgave him. Unfortunately, I had inherited his features, and with them, her resentment. "You're just like him. Seeing your face makes me sick," she would say. As a child, I didn't fully understand her words, but I felt the sting of her disdain, the cold stares, the sharp remarks. To her, I was a constant reminder of betrayal and pain. In the early years, my grandparents showed me some kindness, but as my mother leaned on them more for financial support, even they began to distance themselves. By the time I turned 2, my mother had remarried. Soon after, Amy was born, completing her new family unit. I wasn't part of it. One day, I watched my mother, stepfather, and Amy pack their suitcases. "Where are you going?" I asked, hopeful. "On vacation," my mother replied curtly. "Can I come too?" "Of course not. We'll drop you off at daycare." Their laughter echoed as they left without me. It was always the same. I'd be sent to a 24-hour daycare while they went on trips. Each time, I watched them leave, smiles on their faces, while I sank deeper into loneliness. At home, my isolation became undeniable. I was invisible, treated as an unwanted guest. Once, Amy innocently asked, "Why doesn't Sherry get a birthday party?" For a fleeting moment, I thought my mother might show a sliver of care. Instead, she scoffed. "Celebrate her birthday? There's nothing to celebrate." Those words shattered me. Amy, still a child, began mimicking our mother's disdain. Over time, her attitude changed. She looked down on me, following our mother's lead. While Amy's birthdays were marked with cakes, gifts, and celebrations, mine were ignored. No candles, no acknowledgement. When I entered high school, another blow came. My family refused to pay for my education. With no support, I attended vocational school and started working to support myself. It felt like an escape. Being outside that house, earning my way, was far better than staying trapped in their toxic presence. At 18, I made the hardest decision of my life. I left. I craved freedom, a life where I wouldn't feel suffocated under the weight of their rejection. When I told my mother, she didn't even blink. "Do whatever you want. You're not our problem anymore." Those words severed the last thread tying me to them. Living on my own wasn't easy. I worked endlessly to survive, but for the first time, I felt free to live for myself. Yet even now, at 22, I can't entirely escape their hold. Memories of their coldness linger, refusing to let me move on completely. When I heard about Amy's coming-of-age ceremony, a familiar ache resurfaced. My own ceremony had been non-existent, but I knew Amy's would be lavish, as everything always was for her. Then, one day, I received an unexpected call from my mother. Hearing her voice for the first time in years made my chest tighten. Amy's 21st birthday is next week. You're not coming, right? She asked bluntly. I was stunned. I wasn't invited. I managed to reply. Good. It'd be awkward if you showed up. Her words cut deeper than I expected. After the call ended, a weight settled over me. Of course, I wouldn't go, but the ache in my chest refused to fade. I thought I had moved on, severed all ties. So why did their words still have power over me? I told myself I wouldn't let them control me anymore, but the past is a stubborn thing, it clings, refusing to let go. Amidst the pain, a flicker of defiance stirred. I couldn't ignore it, the urge to confront them, to confront Amy, to face the pain head-on and prove to them, and to myself, that I was no longer the outsider they cast aside. I wanted to celebrate her milestone, so I bought a cake and a thoughtful gift and decided to visit my family for the first time in years. Standing in front of the familiar door, my heart pounded. It had been so long, and fear of what awaited me gnawed at my resolve. When I rang the doorbell, Amy answered. Her voice was sharp and mocking. Who's there? It's me, Amy, I said cautiously. I brought a cake. Please open the door. After a long, tense silence, the door swung open. Without a word, Amy snatched the cake box from my hands. To my shock, she hurled it back at me. The box hit the ground, the cake splattering across the floor. What are you doing? I asked, my voice trembling. I can't eat food from a stranger, she sneered. Her words struck me harder than I anticipated. I had hoped that despite everything, she might still see me as her sister, but hearing her call me a stranger shattered that hope. As I stood frozen, my mother appeared, laughing alongside Amy. What were you thinking, coming here? She asked, her voice dripping with scorn. Did you come to ruin things? Her words stung, and a wave of regret washed over me. Why is she even here? My stepfather called from the living room. She's not family anymore. Am I not family? I asked, my voice trembling. My mother scoffed. Of course not. We're not even related. Amy laughed cruelly. Did you really think you were one of us? Their words crushed me. I had always known I didn't belong, but hearing it said so plainly tore me apart. Clean up that mess before you leave, my mother barked, gesturing at the ruined cake. Numbly, I obeyed. As I cleaned, Amy and my mother laughed mockingly behind me. She brought the cake, and now she's cleaning it up herself. Amy sneered. Pathetic. Their laughter echoed in my ears, but I focused on finishing as quickly as possible. When I was done, I turned to leave. Leaving already? Should have never come. Huh? Amy taunted. I didn't respond. As I stepped out the door, Amy called after me one last time. Don't come back, stranger. Her words echoed in my mind as the door slammed shut behind me, sealing the final chapter of our relationship. I had clung to the false hope that things might change, that they might finally see me differently, but I was wrong. I was nothing more than a stranger to them, and perhaps I always had been. It was time to stop wasting my energy trying to find a place in their lives. I already had a place where I truly belonged, with my husband, Don. I met Don through a mutual friend, and from the moment he entered my life, everything changed. I had never thought I would get married or have a family of my own, but Don saw me for who I was, accepted me completely, and never judged my complicated past. When I shared my painful memories with him, he listened. You didn't get to choose your family, he said gently, but none of that is your fault. The family we create together will be your true home. His words warmed my heart. For the first time, I felt like I truly belonged somewhere. Don and I built a life full of love and mutual respect. He was my anchor, my safe haven. I never told my family about him. I didn't want their negativity to taint our happiness. But somehow, news of my marriage reached them. 3 days after the cake incident, my mother called. "I heard you got married. Why didn't you tell us something so important?" Her tone was accusatory. I remained calm. "I didn't think it was necessary to tell you." A long silence followed. "Fine, do whatever you want," she said at last. "You'll end up alone anyway." This time, her words didn't hurt. Instead, I felt reassured, knowing how happy I was with my new life. I wasn't alone. I had Dawn, and together we were building a family rooted in love and respect. Her bitterness couldn't touch my happiness. 3 days later, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. When I opened it, I was stunned to see Amy. "How did you find me?" I asked, guarded. "I just wanted to see what kind of guy you married," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. In the living room, her eyes locked on Dawn. "This is your husband? Not bad at all. How did someone like you snag him?" I clenched my fists, anger simmering, but stayed silent. Dawn, however, remained composed. "I'm Sherry's husband," he said firmly. "Please stop with the unnecessary remarks." Amy looked surprised but quickly recovered. Her smile turned sickly sweet. "Don't be so stiff. Let's have some fun. Sherry won't mind, will she?" I was shocked by her audacity, but Dawn didn't waver. "I'm not interested," he said calmly. "My happiness is with my wife. Please stop." A wave of gratitude washed over me. Dawn's loyalty was unwavering. Amy shrugged, her smile fading into a cold smirk. "Whatever. I don't care about your happiness anyway," she said, leaving shortly after. "You don't need people like her in your life, Sherry," Dawn said gently. "For your sake and ours, it's best to cut ties." His words mirrored my thoughts. For years, I had sent money to my family, paying for Amy's tuition and even helping with their mortgage, all in the hope that they might accept me. But they had taken all I had to give and returned only scorn. It was time to stop. From now on, I would focus on the family I was building with Dawn, a family built on kindness, respect, and unconditional love. When I told Dawn I wanted to stop sending money, he smiled warmly and nodded. "That's the right choice, Sherry. You've done more than enough. Now it's time to focus on yourself." His words lifted a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. Taking control of my finances and cutting off the money felt like reclaiming my freedom. Filing the necessary paperwork and halting the payments brought me an overwhelming sense of relief. However, the peace was short-lived. A month later, my routine was shattered by loud, angry banging on my door. When I opened it, my mother and Amy stood there, their faces twisted in fury. "Why didn't the tuition payment go through? The landlord is threatening eviction," my mother spat, her tone accusatory. Their outrage didn't surprise me. I had been expecting this confrontation. Taking a deep breath, I responded calmly. "I stopped the payments because I'm no longer responsible for you." Their expressions shifted from anger to shock. "What do you mean you stopped the payments?" Amy demanded. "I even sold the house to recover what I've already paid," I added, my voice steady. "You sold the house? How could you?" My mother's voice rose in disbelief. "You made it clear I'm not part of your family," I said, meeting their glares head-on, "so I have no obligation to support you." "But what about my tuition?" Amy cried. "I can't finish school without it." "That's your responsibility now, not mine," I replied firmly. "I won't fund a family that doesn't include me." "You can't do this. After everything I've done for you," my mother began, her voice trembling with indignation. "Done for me?" I interrupted, my voice rising for the first time. "You mean the years of neglect and cruelty? I owe you nothing. My decision is final." They tried to argue, their anger quickly turning into desperation. but I stood my ground. "You'll regret this," Amy yelled as they left. "You're the worst sister ever." Their words no longer held power over me. For the first time, I felt truly free. But their harassment escalated. A week later, they began showing up outside my home daily, shouting and causing scenes. They even contacted Dawn's parents in an attempt to shame me. While my in-laws were understanding, they grew concerned. "They've crossed the line," Dawn said one evening. "You need to take action before it gets worse." At first, I hesitated, but I knew he was right. I gathered evidence from our security cameras and filed a police report. Initially, the authorities dismissed it as a family dispute, but I persisted. Finally, after another disruptive incident, the police intervened. My mother and Amy were warned to stay away, but they ignored the warnings. Their behavior escalated until formal restraining orders were issued. Even my neighbors, fed up with the constant commotion, supported my case. Some suggested I move to escape the chaos. "Let's start fresh somewhere new," Dawn said, and I couldn't have agreed more. Quietly, we found a new home and relocated. Even after the move, my mother and Amy tried to track us down. They showed up at Dawn's parents' house, but my father-in-law shut them down firmly. "Sherry is part of our family now," he said. "If you have issues, they're your responsibility, not hers." Amy tried pleading with my mother-in-law for help, but she was equally resolute. "You made your bed, now lie in it." Eventually, their efforts failed, and they stopped trying. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. The harassment had drained me emotionally, but once it ended, life became peaceful again. Dawn and I settled into our new home and focused on building a future together. My in-laws treated me like their own daughter, offering the warmth and acceptance I had always longed for. "Sherry, your family," they told me one evening, "whatever happens, we'll always be here for you." Their words gave me a sense of security I had never known. Meanwhile, my mother and Amy faced the consequences of their actions. Without my financial support, my mother's fragile relationship with her husband fell apart, and they eventually divorced. She lived a quiet, isolated life. Amy, too, struggled. A potential marriage fell through when her fiancé learned about her family's behavior, and she was left to rebuild her life on her own. Despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to pity them. Their actions had led them to this place. In contrast, my life with Dawn flourished. We grew closer through shared experiences, facing challenges and celebrating successes together. "We've been through so much, but look at where we are now," Dawn said one evening as we relaxed in our cozy living room. He took my hand, his sincerity bringing tears to my eyes. "Let's focus on our future. I want to make you as happy as you make me." For the first time, I felt like I truly belonged, with someone who cared for me and a family that supported me. The shadows of my past no longer loomed over me. Dawn and his family had become the family I always longed for. "Family isn't just about blood," Dawn's father once told me. "It's about the bonds you choose to nurture." Those words stayed with me. Looking back, I saw my struggles with my mother and Amy as a painful but necessary part of my journey. They taught me resilience and the value of true family. As Dawn and I moved forward, I knew I had finally found my home, a place filled with love, stability, and a future worth cherishing.